Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the new season 2022-23. We have a great varied lineup of presentations for this year. The content and schedule can be found on our CAMTA website. And opening this season was today Dr. Elizabeth Buccheri. You might have seen in the announcements that she was the former assistant conductor of the Lyric Opera. She played for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. She taught collaborative piano at Northwestern University and Northwestern University. And Alessandra will put her updated bio in a moment in the chat, so you can see how versatile she is as a musician and why she chose the title of Stories of the Life of a Musician Who Plays the Piano. I'm really looking forward to hear these stories. I can tell you she played literally under or with every big international musician at that time. And before I give it over to our presenter, I want to mention our disclaimer. Our programs will be recorded and posted on the CAMTA programs YouTube channel. If you wish not to appear on that video, please put your questions and comments in the chat or refrain until the end after we stop the recording. Thank you so much, and please welcome with me Dr. Elizabeth Buccheri.
Thank you, Yumi. I'm particularly honored to be with you this morning for several reasons. My beloved former student, Yumi, of whom I'm extremely proud, has invited me, and I'm happy to be here with your wonderful organization. She would tell you that when I was first invited, I tried to refuse because I felt that my own career was so unusual for a pianist that perhaps I wasn't the right person. But it seems like, from what I'm looking at, that there's a great variety of people involved in teaching music, which I feel is one of the great callings of our lives. And I was blessed to be able to do that officially in two educational institutions, starting at North Park College, which is now North Park University, when I moved to Chicago. And secondly, Northwestern University, where I was able to practice what I feel was my real calling throughout my life, and that's collaborative piano. I think we all know that word. It has a lot of meanings, and you can interpret it however you wish, but it has an incredible amount of variety and experiences, as you could see if you looked at my bio that I experienced. I would like to tell you a bit of my history and also a little bit about each teacher that I have. There are three. I was born in Chester, South Carolina, into a musical family. My mother was the daughter of the former governor of South Carolina, and he, as my grandfather, fathered 9 daughters, all of whom played the piano. So I really had no choice but to play the piano. And this occurred when I was about 4 years old. My aunt, who was herself a well-known South Carolina piano teacher, told my mother, because I was picking things out on the piano that we had in our home, if you don't start that girl with lessons, she will end up playing in cafes. I always thought that was a very funny way to express things. And I don't know if she knew what she was saying when she said cafes. But in any case, she didn't want me playing commercially as some kind of jazz pianist or something. I don't know her real intention. She's no longer with us. So I lived in Chester for 18 years with my parents. And in 14 of those years, I studied the piano with a very remarkable woman named Mrs. Bryce. She was the piano teacher of the day for most everybody I knew in my hometown, and has had successful professional musicians still operative today. The other person who was a great mentor to me and who was an important influence was a woman called Catherine Moore. She was not only the director of the church choir where I was an attender, but also the director of the church children's chorus and the high school chorus. So she was a well-known musician who spread herself throughout that small town and was a great influence for me and continued to be even after I left Chester. the only negative I would have about her at all was when I was quite young and a member of the children's chorus, a singing member, she discovered that I played the piano, and she, after that, had me be the accompanist for the children's chorus. And I regretted that because I love to sing. It's not because I have any kind of good voice, but it was just the whole collaboration and being with your friends that I missed. And the same thing happened in the high school. As soon as she saw me there in the 9th grade, she had me be the pianist often. So I did get that good experience, but it wasn't exactly what I felt I needed. When I graduated from high school, Mrs. Bryce, who had taught me all those years, sent me to audition for a scholarship at Winthrop, what is now Winthrop University. At that time, it was an all-women's state college. My parents, therefore, could afford the tuition of that because it was less than what a private school might have been. It had, fortunately for me, had a very, very fine music department in both piano performance and vocal performance, but also in music theory and music history. So that was a wonderful grounding for me. And after that place, well, I should tell you one little funny episode. When I went to audition for the scholarship as an 18-year-old, I played, very good repertoire, Ravel, Rachmaninoff, Beethoven, several things. And at the end of that, the man who was the chair of the department and who became my piano teacher said to me, "Would you please play a tonic chord in C?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. That did not deny me the scholarship. And of course, I learned very early in theory class what a tonic chord in C is. If he had said play a C major chord, I could have done that. But he used that word tonic, and I had no idea what that was. So I had many great memories, and still have memories, of Winthrop University, which is now Winthrop University. My teacher, Dr. Jess Casey, was a graduate of the Eastman School, and he was determined that I go there. At the time, he had still very active connections to the admissions office, the director, and others at the Eastman School. And therefore, I got into that college, Eastman School, without an audition. I sent a tape. I think that's unheard of these days. We certainly don't do that much at Northwestern. But I got in at that school. It was a great culture shock for me to go from almost rural South Carolina to Rochester, New York. I won't even tell you about my battles with the weather, but they were significant. And I had to buy new clothes, blah, 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 blah. But I went there to spend 2 years to get a master's degree. And I had an uncle who helped me with the tuition, et cetera. And so that was great. But as I went through this master's degree, I realized that I should continue to stay there and attempt the doctoral degree. The doctoral degree at Eastman was called Performance and Pedagogy. There was no collaborative piano as a degree. It's now a very well-known collaborative piano place, but at that time, there was no degree. So I did, however, have talks with the dean about my desire to constantly be a collaborative pianist, and he was very supportive of that whole idea. That said, I still had to go through the rigors of a solo career piano recital curriculum, which I did. It took several years because before I finished all of the actual requirements, I got married. And that marriage took me to Chicago. My husband had, at that time, he was a theory major, PhD at Eastman, and that's where we met. He had 3 job offers. I think that's pretty unusual today as well. 2 of them were in lesser known places than Chicago, Illinois. But he, happily for me, took Chicago, and we moved here. After that, both of us worked to finish our doctorates. He, a PhD in theory, and I, a DMA in piano. I should backtrack a little and talk about the nature of those three important teachers. The first was Mrs. Bryce, and she was gentle, quiet, and a very wonderful person. I think she was self-taught, but she did teach me scales, key signatures, etc., not tonic chords. Then at Winthrop, my teacher was Dr. Jess Casey, whom, as I told you, was a graduate of the Eastman School. At Eastman, I started with a man who I won't name because it's fairly negative what I'm going to say. He was a lovely person, but a lesson would be such as he would say, "What did you bring?" I would play whatever it was, and he would say, "What else did you bring?" So it was a little bit, I don't know how to describe it, but disappointing, I would say. Around that time, the very famous collaborative pianist Brooks Smith arrived on the faculty. I don't know if you know that name, but you should look it up. He became most well known as the pianist for Jascha Heifetz. And he had many stories about what the difficulties were for him to work with that very well-known violinist. They played all over the world and made many recordings, which you should, when you can, find and try to listen to, because they are stunning. Mr. Smith, all my teachers, I should say, in general, I could say, were teachers who taught music, not how to use your fingers. Maybe sometimes they would talk a lot about the fingering, but not so much the weight of the arms or any of the usual things that what I would say the usual piano teachers teach. So I felt like I had to sort of at times work on my own to accomplish such kinds of things that were taught differently than what I was taught. So once I came to Chicago, this is another factor that I will eventually advise you about. I had mentorship. The director of the Eastman School when I was a student was a man named Walter Hendel. He was a conductor, and he had been the assistant to Fritz Reiner at Chicago. Fritz Reiner is, of course, the well-known former music director of the Chicago Symphony. So Walter Hendel introduced me to several people in Chicago, the most important of whom for me was Margaret Hillis. If you don't know that name, you should look this up. And there's a brand new book written about her by one of her former assistants. I recommend that book because as a woman in a different time than we are in now, she faced lots of challenges and she was a determined person. And I had an audition for her that I will not take the time to go through, but it's unique. If there's time in the question and you're curious about it, I can tell you because it was a unique experience for me. But she hired me at Northwestern because she had assumed the choral duties in that university. And she went into the dean then and said, "I need a professional pianist." And so I was hired. And at the time, I had no connection to the Chicago Symphony Chorus, but Margaret, decided after several years of our work together that I should come in as a sub for the Chicago Symphony, which I did. Eventually, for various reasons, I became that principal pianist. And Margaret and I, became very close friends. My family was close to her. We spent many holidays with her. She lived close by in Wilmette. And my son was recalling recently very many memories he has of going to her place on New Year's Day and watching football games. We had a wonderful relationship with her personally and I professionally. So from then on, and if you look at the bio, you will see a lot of different experiences, but I give several people the credit of mentoring me and making sure that certain conductors of the Chicago Symphony knew who I was. They would hear me at times because there's always, when there's a big choral work, there's what's called a conductor's piano rehearsal. And they would come and listen mainly to the chorus, but they would hear me at the piano. And that's how I got started with both George Schulte, Claudio Abbado, not so much Daniel Barenboim, but some others. And I think word gets around in that respect, that people know what your work is and they try you out and they find they like you and then you're hired. I never had a contract at the Chicago Symphony, but that relationship went on for 28 years. I don't want to go to any details about how that happened, but it did happen. And so I never had any kind of job security that, you know, the next day they might suddenly say we would want to try someone else. That did not happen for 28 years. Somewhere along the line, and it did not have to do with the change from Margaret Hillis into my dear friend Dwayne Wolfe. It had to do with, I just felt I had done what I could in that chorus. And I also knew that I could probably do well at lyric opera. And so I approached lyric opera because they were doing Berg's opera, Lulu. If you know that, it's an extremely difficult opera. I had done Berg's opera, Wozzeck, with Claudio Abbado and felt that maybe naively that I wanted to somehow come in contact with the entire Berg opera repertoire. Well, that's easy because there are only 2 operas. So I approached lyric opera because also I knew the music staff at the Lyric at the time loved playing Bellini and Verdi and the usual Italian repertoire, and that they would have no interest in learning Lulu. So I, with that under my belt, went in to see Bill Mason, who was a junior person at the time, but became the general director. And I then had other than that scholarship audition to Winthrop University, I had the second only in my life audition as a pianist. So I went over there and I played the Prelude to Rosen Cavalier. I had to tell you this too, because I knew this would be a part of the audition. One must, when auditioning for an opera company, one must play well, but also one must sing at the same time one is playing. They do not expect you to sound great, and I probably never did, but I could sing. And don't ask me where that skill came from. I just was able to do it. And so I played very hard things. I played Wozzeck and sung. I played the Prelude to Rosen Cavalier, which is obviously no singing. I had never played that, but I didn't speak about my early training as a sight reader. But for some reason, I always was. And I don't know where that came from, a God's gift, maybe, I don't know, but I always was. And so I had not ever played the Prelude to Rosen Cavalier, but I had sat through all the orchestra rehearsals of it being rehearsed by the Chicago Symphony and Eric Leinsdorf. I had listened to it for days, so I could play it. I played that, and then they said, you're going to sight read. And so they gave me the very famous Lago from Barbara of Seville. And I said, that's not sight reading. And they said, never mind, do it anyway. And so I did that. I had to sing that. That's a little bit hard. I got that job. I started there part-time. At the time, it required 23 weeks of work to be full-time. And so I did that. It took 2 or 3 years for them to, and usually because of a retirement from the music staff, it would open up more hours for someone. And that's what happened to me. I stayed there from 1987 till 2018. And it was a huge privilege and also an incredibly challenging thing. I have told people, and I think this is would be pretty well agreed upon by colleagues, the hardest thing we have to do in that job is backstage conducting, because there are small snippets of almost every opera, particularly Verdi, Mozart, all others, in which a small group of instruments plays from backstage. That term is banda, meaning a band is backstage. And someone has to connect them and coordinate with the music that's going on in the pit. That was the hardest thing I and all my colleagues ever have to do. And that was a challenge. Now, as far as conducting, I had it required in my undergraduate years. And it was a wonderful experience. The guy was the choral conductor in college, and he taught us basics of conducting. I also had it required in Eastman at the graduate level. So I'd had a bit of training about simply beating and beating well enough to react to rubato or other things that happen in the pit. Because if you're off from the pit, it's not good. And so it was a very scary thing. We were back there looking at a television of the conductor in the pit. And we were conducting that small group, which could be as many as 15 people. So they made a nice amount of noise. And that I never looked forward to, but I would be assigned to that. We all were. So there were many duties in that opera job. And I tried to reflect that and tell that to the many young conductors I'm in charge with today, because it's a whole different world, the opera world, than conducting an orchestra. As of now, I have had a mantra my entire professional life. I'm going to retire when it would appear that people would be sorry. I have sat through many occasions, mostly at the Chicago Symphony, but some at Lyric Opera too, of orchestral musicians who can't let go, and it's embarrassing. And these are famous players who at one time sounded fabulous and slowly but surely lost some of that skill or talent or what, and hang on. And it's not good. And I saw it enough times to decide that will not be what I do. So my first retirement, I think I'm getting this right, was from Northwestern. The second was from Lyric Opera. And the last was something that I have not yet spoken about, my wonderful job at the Aspen Music Festival. I went into the director, to the president of Aspen, and I said, this will be my last summer. And he said, that is entirely unacceptable. And he didn't smile. And so I was a little bit worried about that, but I was determined about that. And it's a good thing that I did that. That was in 2018. I had held on to that job because it was summers only, and I felt like I could manage it. But in 18, I realized that I didn't have the strength and go-gettedness that I had, and that I didn't want to hang on. So I retired from there. And it's a blessing that I did that, because that was in July of 18 that I made that trip to the president. In October of 18, I was on a trip with Aspen people for auditions. Despite my retirement, I had agreed to go on this audition trip so that they didn't have to find someone new suddenly. And so on that audition trip, I was in New York City, and I had a major health emergency. And it was a blessing that I was where I was, because I was in the hospital within 10 to 15 minutes. And I had a surgery, which was at the time and still may be experimental. It saved my life. It saved my cognition. It saved my physicality. It saved my speech. It saved me. And I'm still functioning quite well and happy to be with you. Do you have any questions? Because I'm a big talker. And as you can see, I can go at it forever, as Yumi knows. So I would love to have you ask any questions. There's one more thing about what I feel were things that made my career possible. One is, I think I had certain talents, and I'm not talking about just the musical aspect of it. I was raised by very, very caring parents. There was no strife in our family life. I was raised in the South, where certain expectations exist about your behavior. So that, I feel, was a great blessing for me. The other thing is the idea of mentorship, because I can name about 5 people that I've thought of as I've prepared myself to meet with you, who helped me in a way that helped me be in another activity. to try something else, to say to other people, this woman is capable of doing XYZ, and you should try her. And then, of course, they try you, and it works, and sometimes doesn't, and you go forward. So I would say to you as teachers that you should do two things for your students besides the actual musical teaching. You should watch for and notice their special talents that don't have anything to do with how they play. That's one thing, because there are many, many arts, music, etc. jobs in which an informed person is needed. So I would say to you, please watch for those special talents that certain of your students will have. And then the other thing is to be their mentors and help them through what you think their life path will be, because that itself helped me immensely and continues to, because I'm quite active now. If you've read my bio, you see at the very bottom that I'm active with something called the Schulte Foundation US. That was begun 20 years ago in honor of Sir George Schulte. And we took as our mission the assistance, financial and otherwise, of young American conductors. And there are lots of reasons why I could go into great detail about that foundation, but I won't. You can look it up. There's a website. You can see some of the things we do. You can see some of the names of the people we've supported and continue to support. So I go back to my suggestion to you. Do you have questions? I saw one hand.
I have one question. I know you taught at North Park.
I did.
Could you tell us a little bit about those years?
I should have told you in the first place, because those were fabulous years for me. I was there for 25 years, and I'm still very close to them. I don't know as many people there as I did, of course, but just last week, my handyman and I drove to North Park and gave them a large amount of musical material. That included mainly opera scores, piano vocal scores, and musical dictionaries. And those, I had to coordinate with the people there now, and I am happy to have done that. Northwestern may have a complaint about that, but Northwestern's library compared to North Park's is much, much smaller. And they need these materials much, much more. I taught there, as I said, for a long time. I didn't know much about teaching because despite the fact that my doctorate had the word pedagogy there, I had never had a pedagogy class. And to this day, I have never had a pedagogy class. So I've said to people sometimes, I felt like those early students need a refund. I feel like I still am in contact with them, and several of them are doing extremely well in Chicago. So what else could I say about North Park? I did start a chamber music series there because it was a neighborhood that seemed to have a bit of a desert for classical music. And so we had a good hall. I decided to do this, and I had by that time many friends in the Chicago Symphony who I could invite to play. And so I started that chamber music series, and I'm quite proud of it. It went for 25 years. Along the way, I had to switch from being full-time at North Park to being part-time largely because of lyric opera. And so I did that, but they had me stay, and I stayed happily. And I donate to them every single month. And I have been in contact with them about a certain scholarship that they've named in my honor. And I want to make sure that that goes on after I pass away. And I've been in contact with them just in the last 2 weeks about that. So I'm quite happy to be still connected to North Park.
I just want to say that Don and Carolyn say hello.
Oh, thank you. Are you related?
We met. We're friends.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you for that. They used to be in Urbana. Are they still?
No, they actually live near Elburn.
Okay,
Still very active in music.
great. Other questions?
Dr. Buccheri, so I'm just addressing our audience. So today's presentation is a little bit different from what we had before because it's a little broader. And when I had Dr. Buccheri as a chamber coach, it was just about how to make the performance better. And I didn't know what a big fish she was actually after I graduated and had lunch with her together. And I found it just fascinating. She always studied just piano performance. It was not collaborative. It could be also that at the time they didn't have that. But she was such a versatile and well-rounded musician. And when I listen back again, my two biggest getaways also as a piano teacher is, we pianists tend to be a little bit nerdy about our own piano repertoire. It's always about piano recitals. And Dr. Buccheri reminded me each time when we had lunch together how important it is to be open to other genres and also to teach the students to be open to opera, to singing, to symphonies. And I remember she was talking about how do you understand Beethoven sonatas without not only listening to the symphonies, but also, was it Missa Solemnis?
Yes.
It opened my eyes, and I thought this is important for us, that we are reminded that music is so much bigger. And I was fascinated how she got all these gigs and playing opportunities, not only for singers, but she did also conducting. I didn't know that she was, I knew that she played a lot for the CSO, but I didn't know that she was a remember. But I know that a lot of these big conductors actually requested her, specifically her, and she had to come back. And that's why she played for so many years. My other getaway is also that we should be prepared and do just gratefully whatever our duties are right now. I think as pianists, we sometimes tend to, I have to accompany, I have to do this for that choir. And we feel like it's not solo, it's not, we don't get the spotlight. But as you see in her story, you never know. You just try to do your best. And there might be a musician who is very interested and likes how you play, and that opens up other opportunities, right? So, Dr. Buccheri, do you have any more anecdotes to share with us with the big musicians? It gives us just a little bit of a flair of the big music.
Don't get me started on anecdotes. I would never shut up. People think I should write books, but first of all, I must clarify one thing. I never had a contract at the Chicago Symphony, ever. So I was not protected by the union by anything. And the pianist was Mary Sauer, as you probably know. And she and I were friendly. There was never any problem with her. And I did play on the stage a few times when she needed an extra keyboard player. But I never had any kind of guarantee of employment. That's one thing. But about these anecdotes, I was in the room by myself with two people who might be as famous as you could be in the classical music world. I would point to, just to pick some people out of the air: George Schulte, Sir George Schulte, Yo-Yo Ma, Sir George Schulte, or Renee Fleming. I can keep going. And a recent person advised me, because people have said to me, you should write a book, because once I get started talking about all these famous people and little anecdotes about things, and one person said to me, you must not do that. You must not write a book. You must not put this in print at all, because these people counted on you for privacy. You heard things that they would not want talked about or printed about. And so I took that seriously. I thought, he's right about that, because if I go around blabbing about all that stuff, it's not attractive. It's not appropriate. And when I'm sitting with you by myself, I can blab on forever about those things, but you're not going to print that, and I hope, and then it's just not right. And so I haven't done that very much. The one thing I could say about Yo-Yo Ma, other than the fact that he wrote me a letter of thanks one time for my playing for him, which I have in my notebook for my children to look at and see, He is, I think, the most humanitarian person you will ever see. And I was in the room when he, who inherited the two cellos that belong to the wife of Daniel Barenboim, and that is the well-known cellist Jacqueline Dupre. Yo-Yo Ma inherited one of those cellos. So fast forward many years, Yo-Yo Ma comes to work with Daniel Barenboim, who was the ex-husband of Jacqueline Dupre. So the whole time in the room, the two of them were going back and forth of, first of all, Yo-Yo Ma explains why he's not playing that cello that he inherited that day, because he said, I never want to take it on a big tour. And so he's offering Daniel Barenboim his apologies. And Daniel Barenboim, of course, is saying, no problem, I understand completely. And then the music starts, and it was the Schumann Cello Concerto. And the going back and forth was, I'll never forget, because it is so deferential to each other, because they had such respect for each other. And you probably don't know Daniel Barenboim very well, but he could be a difficult person. And so to see him in that way, being so deferential to another musician, and Yo-Yo Ma deserved that kind of deference and still does, I was amused by and impressed with. So those are the kind of things I saw. And there's so many Schulte stories and many Claudio Abbado stories. And so I'm carrying on what I know would be Schulte's great happiness, and that is assisting young musicians. His wife was our mentor until her death last year, and his daughter is going to join us for our annual dinner in October. So the Schulte family is close to us. I knew all of them, and we are happy to be doing this. And I'm convinced that he would be thrilled, were he alive, to see what we're doing.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the foundation, what you do?
Well, I am a board member, and the board itself is comprised of a whole variety of types. Most are music lovers and subscribers to both Chicago Symphony and Lyric Opera and other music of the Baroque, all kinds of other places that you see these board members. And most of them are, how do I say this? People of means. Do you understand that? They're wealthy, extremely wealthy. And so some of us, the people who make the decisions about which conductors get money, are all experienced people in the field. One is a former chorus master of the Chicago Symphony. Another is a coach for Royal Opera House, London. And as we are today, it's very convenient that we can communicate with each other on Zoom and other ways, because she, as one member, lives in London. So it's not as easy for us to see her in person, but we all know her and respect her. She is one. And then there's another man who spent 30 years in France. He's an American, but he spent 30 years in France as an artist agent. And so the four of us make the decisions of who gets the money. The board tells us each year how much money we're allowed to give, and it's generally around $100,000. So that shows you the amount of money that's available because of the efforts of these other board members. Our committee stands with a lot of authority. And it has been said to me, and was said to me even this week, the foundation would not exist without your committee. And they don't mean me, they mean our group, because we choose well. If you wish to look at the people we've chosen, you may not yet know the names, but some of them are names you will know. These are the future Schulte, Abbado, Barenboim types, and they're doing well. And every year in January, we receive applications. This year it was 39 people. And we study these applications extremely carefully. It's a great deal of time required for us, and we're volunteers. So it's because we are committed to this that we do this. We study these applications carefully, and then as a committee, we choose who gets what amount. Then I have the wonderful duty of calling them, because it's a wonderful call to make, to say, hello, I'm Betty Buccheri, you're getting $10,000. And that's the kind of thing that it makes me happy to be able to do. And it's a privilege. So that's what the foundation is. And it was formed by two people who are no longer living, who were friends, personal friends of Sir George Schulte and Lady Valerie Schulte. And so they did this, and then it limped along for a few years and then sort of came into view. And now all these young people studying conducting know about us and come to us and try to get some funding. We also offer mentorship, and we offer an opera residency program, which I'm proud to say was named for me. I didn't seek that at all. They named it for me because I started the program. We agreed as a committee that our American conductors are not receiving opera training at all, in some cases at all. And so we need to do something about it. And what we have done is small, but it's going extremely well. In fact, I had a contact made to me just yesterday from Washington National Opera, a big opera company, important opera company, who wants to go in collaboration with us for an opera residency. And the way that works, we choose a young conductor whom we know, and we send them there. We pay for their transportation, we buy their scores, we pay for their housing, and we give them a fee. And it's been a successful program that most opera companies want because it costs the company nothing. We're quite proud of it. So that's sort of it about the foundation.
Yeah, that's amazing that you're able to offer so much support and get all these talents. Feel free to chime in with any questions. As you see, Dr. Buccheri is very easygoing. I want to go back to your career and help me to understand. So you did piano performance, and you took almost every gig that you could do during it, like accompanying here, choir, voice teachers, and so on. And then you started kind of as the pianist at Lyric Opera and played for all these singers. And
that's not where I started.
Oh, okay.
I started at Chicago Symphony Chorus. And that was through Walter Hindle. That was the mentorship I was talking about. He introduced me, because she knew him, to Margaret Hillis. And then from there, it went forward. So that was sort of the beginning. Now, when I moved to Chicago, I had no work. No one knew me. There was nothing. I was sort of hired at Northwestern, even before Margaret Hillis, to play some tricky scores like Pierrot Lunaire, Schoenberg. Some of the conductors wanted to do the piece. And I guess through my husband, they knew that I was a pianist. And so they hired me, and I did that. And you do those kinds of things. And when you're beginning in a city you don't know, you start with anything. You accept anything that seems decent, even if it doesn't pay. And that certainly didn't pay. So I started sort of that way, and then slowly, and I can tell you it was slow at first. And I was fortunate. I was married. We had a nice life. I didn't suffer for money. So that's what I can say. When I've had some summer fellowships at Northwestern, I had some in the summer where people would come from the outside, and we advertised it as collaborative piano, and it was all vocal. And what I used to say to them was, those people who came from out of town as pianists, be careful that in your city, you may not know, if you're in school right now, what city you're going to be a resident of. Be careful that you seek out any kind of job you might think would be there, whether it's a church choir, whether it's a civic chorus, whether it's whatever it is, whether voice teachers. This is what I always tell them. Voice teachers always want a pianist, always, no matter what. And they pay. It's not a lot, but they pay. They're used to paying. So this is not a hardship for them. Seek all of that out. I did not have to do that. I had voice teachers in school that I played for. I must have always felt I wanted to be with other people. I didn't want to just be practicing Beethoven sonatas by myself in a room. I must have always had that. And I guess that helps. With a person like me, it helped.
And how come that you were playing all these orchestral scores from the partituras? Because I think it's not a talent that every pianist can do. Were you exposed to it during your school years?
When you play for an opera company, you play from what's called a piano vocal score. And that's what I gave to North Park. Those are orchestral scores that have been reduced by somebody, and sometimes badly, reduced to a piano version. And so there's no need to play from what you call partitura, but I did get the reputation for being able to play partitura. Don't ask me how or why. It happened accidentally sometimes. I was sent to a rehearsal with Claudio Votto, in which the librarians of the orchestra gave me the wrong score. And he had his score, which he plopped in front of me and said, here, you can play from this. It was a full score of a Mahler symphony. And I did okay until, because I didn't have to transpose the oboe part, which was prominent. But he turned the page and it switched to clarinet. And that was when I sort of faked what I was doing, because I sort of knew the piece in my ears. And so I sort of faked it. But many years later, when I came to work with him so much, I reminded him of that. And he said, oh, I remember that. But he said, I didn't know that was you. And I said, well, thank goodness you didn't know that was me. I don't know how I could always do that. And people thought I could do that, just on the spot. No way. If I had to do it, and I have had to do it, reading from the partitura for something where a piano reduction does not exist, then I get the partitura and I bring it to the piano and I learn it. I try to mark it so that I realize what the prominent voices are, and mark it so that I can play a lot of it. You can never play all of it. So I'm glad you asked that question.
Yeah, but that means that your sight reading skills must have been phenomenal. How did you foster this? Was there a lot of curiosity since you were little to try and to read through new music?
Yes, I'm glad you asked this. I would get a new book from my teacher, Mrs. Price, and I would come home with it. And I would say to my mother, I have a new book. I was so excited. And so I would go to the piano immediately and I would play. And my mother would shout from the kitchen, I thought she gave you one piece. I said, she did. I was playing all the pieces in the book. My teacher, Brooks Smith, who was a fabulous sight reader, he felt and said to me more than once, sight readers are born. I'm not sure I agree with that. I know that it can be improved. I've seen it improved in my own teaching. And I know it can be improved. But I never had to improve mine. It was always there. There were times, of course, when there were pieces that I couldn't play because of the difficulty of them. And there are certain pieces now that I will admit to you, I never play, and I would never play. And one is Earl King of Schubert. Another is the Quartz Sonata of Beethoven. I don't feel equipped to play those very hard pieces. And so sight reading doesn't matter. I have refused those pieces many times. People hear me play and they think there's a certain level and they think I can play it. I can't and I won't. So I'm glad you asked that question about the sight reading. And Brooks Smith also said, in addition to saying sight readers are born, he said sight readers are also great drivers. And he's talking about cars. So that was interesting to hear as well. I don't know that's true. And I don't think there's been ever any data that scientifically that backs that up. But he had a point, because sight readers have incredible reflexes. the ability to react to a visual immediately with their hands. And that's for a pianist anyway. And so that's, I think, where he comes from with driving, because you have to react to things you see on the road. You have to brake, you have to turn, you have to do all those things. So he always said that to me.
It's very interesting and also funny. But then the next step is you played for all these singers, but then the next step is you were also conducting. Where did this come from?
Not at the same time. No, when you play for singers, you don't conduct. What you do is what's called, you coach. And that's a broad term that means, and singers all know that term, and they refer to people as their coach. What that means is this is a person who not only can play the piano reduction, I stress that it's a piano reduction, so you're not playing the whole score. You play it, and if you're in a room with these people, you have to sing the other lines, the lines of the characters that they are learning. They are learning a role in which they are sung to by other singers. And you, as the pianist coach, have to be able to sing those lines in time and playing the right notes. So it's not an easy job. I'll admit this to you. And there were times when I felt not up to it, but it's important. And I have to tell you, as far as lyric opera is concerned, it's fabulous pay, fantastic pay. So that's a terribly kind of blatant thing to say, but it's true. And that's not why I went there at all. But and it's a union house. I was a part of the union people that had to negotiate the contracts every 2-3 years. And so I'm proud of that contract. I think my colleague and I did a good job. The lyric was incredibly responsive as management. They were incredibly responsive to us and rewarded us and treated us extremely well. And I hope that's still the case. I'm not there anymore. I still know a lot of the people, but I obviously don't know the ins and outs of the contract.
I'd like to ask one question that reflects on your teaching career. I know that you produced a lot of successful students. Is there one keynote or touchstone that you feel is the most important?
Well, yes, to first of all, kind of assess what they're like as human beings. They need more than simply someone correcting everything they do that's not quite right. They need that done, I think, in a very loving manner. And I know that, I will admit this to you, that, when you're in a college or university, you get recommendations at the end of a quarter. Students fill out, that's not the right word, but it's, I can't think of the word, where they evaluate what you've done as a teacher. And I can say that I got very good responses always, but I always also got one word, and both schools, North Park and Northwestern. And Yumi can say whether she ever wrote this about me. She's intimidating. Now, some people said, you have to realize you know much more than they do. So they find that intimidating. I hope it was not. And I have, as you can tell, a very straightforward way of speaking. It's very straightforward. It's out there. And it could be misunderstood as being angry or somehow overly corrective or, whatever. But I got that word in both those colleges. So I don't know. I can tell you also, and I'm glad you asked this question too, Cynthia, the one thing I miss the most is teaching. I play the piano every day. I didn't go into this illness with much detail, and I don't really feel like I should, but I'm going to anyway. I had a stroke. So my whole right side was gone in terms of movement. And so I had to reclaim my right hand to play the piano. I play every day. It is not at the level I was playing, but I'm quite proud of it because I could see my neurologist when I visited him for the first time after getting out of the hospital. You must play the piano every day. And I thought to myself, this is a disaster, because at that time, I could not put my right hand on the piano and make a single sound, not a sound. And now I'm playing Brahms, Beethoven, Debussy, Bach, not quite as well as I would like, Chopin nocturnes. I'm playing, and I'm playing for pleasure. And it is a pleasure because I have no pressure. There's nobody in the house saying, play an A flat like I used to do to my own children. You know, there's nobody here and no one's listening to me. I went away for the winter last year and I hope to do it again this year. And I was talked into going and playing a recital. I had not played a recital in 45 years. I decided I would try it. And I played for 7 people. These were my 7 closest people in that place where I was housed. It was a senior citizen place. And I had asked in the very beginning of going there, do you have a piano? They did. And I went by myself every day to this beautiful bar. It was a bar, but it was way up high on the 5th floor. Nobody was up there. The view was out to the water. It was incredible. And I was all by myself. And it was a decent Yamaha. And I played every single day. And so by the end, well, all through the 8 weeks I was there, I would say, hello, I'm Betty, I haven't met you. And they'd say, oh, you're the pianist. Because in homes like that, people don't have much to talk about, but the activities among themselves. So I got known as the pianist. And so when I played the recital, and they were wonderful, my right hand was really shaking. I didn't embarrass myself. There were some things that, because I was a sight reader, I could jump in and correct whenever I needed to instantly. So there was no real embarrassment, that I felt. And they were pleased that I did it. And I did it among the last days I was there. So that was one thing about playing the piano. And also I was glad to be able to say to you that teaching is what I miss the most.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Buccheri. I think we slowly come to an end. Thank you so much for sharing your professional experience and your memories with us and giving us a glimpse into the world of opera and singers, and giving us also ideas of what we can do as piano teachers beyond our piano teaching. Thank you so much for being here. The next meeting in October will be online, but it will be announced in the newsletter and on the webpage and on Facebook.